Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play the Legendary Starfy. In the last part we continued on our adventures in post-game and finished off not only the Sea of Ice stage, but also the Deep Sea stage, which means now it's time for us to head after the Sunken Ship stage. But first off, this is the Sea Jams menu. We got this for finding the real tone of the ocean in the Deep Sea stage last time when looking for treasure chests. It's just your box standard sound test, but it's got all the stuff you'd want to listen to, and again, this game's soundtrack is really good, so nice to have. What do we got for hints this time around, Mo? Dolphy seems to know all about the Sunken Ship's exit route. Think maybe there's some treasure in there? Go ask Dolphy about it. Notably, in this stage, Dolphy is how you reach a couple of the things, because not only do you need to talk to them in order to actually reach the main part of the ship, but you need to talk to them in order to reach... This is important for technically four reasons. The technical fourth is that if you didn't get the catfish boat vehicle yet, you should go do that now. But the three reasons are, for one thing, this is how you reach the boss fight, so for that treasure chest you need to come here. There are sealed blocks in this room, which is reason number 2, and there were sealed blocks back in the rooms where the shovel, pickaxe, and bomb were, so that means we're going to need to do another thing over in that direction, though we're not taking care of that and the boss fight until last, of course. Most of the other treasure chests are all tied to the routes where the keys were when we were here in the main story. Also, I do want to actually correct some things I've been wrong about in this LP, namely when it comes to the fan translation itself. I said this was by MegaHog 2015 and their group over on romhacking.net, and that's technically true, but MegaHog in specific was more so actually on the graphics team for the fan translation here. They were also a proofreader. The proper name of the group that actually did this is the Starfy Translation Team, which was started by Tor Chickens back in somewhere in 2017, I think. Meanwhile, the actual people behind this are Evie Melody, LV Soulmate Forever, who is the main lead, Pabble Talks, who is a project manager, Normat, who is a programmer, Higsby, who is a main translator, the D-Day Jelly Productions, who is a translator, MegaHog, who, as it says, proofreading and graphics stuff. Evie Lover the Rowdy Ruff was on graphics, Loud Jinxie was on graphics, Dario was on graphics, A Useless Mage was a minor translation assistant and also did the README, Valham did the README, Mixelmania 1997 is the one who did the Origin subtitle graphics, and Gothic 251 was a proofreader and editor. Thanks a ton! Oh, hey, have you heard this rumor? There's apparently something called a catfish boat located somewhere around this ship. With that, I guess you could ride across poison water without swimming in it? Anyway, take these pearls. Now we're doing the bomb mini-games, normal and hard version. This sucks because the AI just gets absurdly good at bouncing it back and forth, but it's worth it for the 100% reward anyway. Now, the reason I noted all those people in specific is, for one thing, I was doing some more research about other Starfy fan translations. That same group is working on a Starfy 2 fan translation, apparently was working on it somewhat at the same time they were doing this game's fan translation. And also, I wanted to make sure I actually credited the entire team rather than just saying it was the one guy. Wonderful job, just what I'd expect from you. Let me read you to a place with a rare creature for your picture book. And take these as well. These enemies that were coming up on here are kind of annoying in that they actively electrify for a short period of time and they're completely invincible when they do that. But if you just wait for them to stop electrifying, they're nice and open. Admittedly, the reason I made that mistake is because usually the uploader portion on like a given romhacking.net page is like a team name and not an individual account name, like with Aeon Genesis doing that a lot, which is just a larger group. So at least it's like, okay, this is this entire section here that did that. But just crediting the one person with it didn't feel right, especially after I found that out, so I was like, okay, we gotta fix that there. Of course, that will be reflected properly in the actual descriptions and playlist before this gets uploaded because, well, these are all being done before it gets uploaded anyway, so in case y'all were saying something about that in the video, too late, already fixed that. In fact, now that I think about it, I can just, since I haven't put the sidebars on yet and haven't done any of the extra filters I like to do nowadays, I could just put text about that on screen when I put part 1 into After Effects. So you know what? You're hearing the exact moment I'm deciding to do that. So that entire conversation is sort of pointless, but oh well. So this particular auto-scroller is kinda tight, mostly because it requires you to really use your Ultra Star Spin's jump out of water to its fullest extent, and some of the jumps here do get pretty precise. That last one isn't too bad, but the final jump to get the treasure chest at the end of this section is very tough to make if you come out at the wrong speed or angle. because you can just barely not make it, and if you miss that enough times in a row, well, you're just gonna get crushed, and that's an entire room start over. So let's actually get the chest this time around. There we go. What it really comes down to is you need to constantly be holding the hover button while you're going out of water, just so you start hovering at the first opportunity you can. And we're about halfway done with the treasures at this point. Hell yeah. I want to say out of all the levels in the later half of the game that we're revisiting for post-game, the Sunken Ship's probably my favorite structurally because it's pretty well divided in that, okay, 3 of them are in these directions and they're very quick to get to. The other 3 are over by the boss fight and all also pretty quick to get to. And that's just because this level was structured so radically differently than the other ones to begin with. But it does lead this to being probably the easiest level since Coral Reef to get all the treasures in some regards, which is kind of funny, but it's also kind of a symptom of this structure for a post-game wasn't exactly the most graceful choice, but oh well. This particular side pathway for a treasure chest is actually one of my favorite enemy designs in the game. It's just so... It's goofy looking, but I love it. Look at that little thing. Look at that little balloon with Super Saiyan spiky hair. I love it. It's adorable. In general, though, I feel like I haven't talked about it enough. This game is pretty great looking for a GBA game. And almost everything in it is just dropped and adorable in a way that you really only see out of, like, Kirby, Pokemon, and specifically indie games nowadays. And it really makes me wonder if we're ever gonna get a new Starfy game again. It'd be nice if they just went, here's a collection of all of them out of nowhere. That'd be kind of funny, too. But I think, like, especially if they went for, like, somewhere between the Kirby Canvas Curse sequel art style and Forgotten Lands art style visually, like, in terms of, like, both the fidelity, but also, like, somewhat of a clay texture and all that, this could just look great on modern systems. And by that I mean whatever the successor to the Switch is going to be at this point, which will probably be announced by the time this gets uploaded, hopefully. Maybe. It is currently December 18th. But we'll find out. What's inside this treasure box? We got ourselves a White Mage's Whacking Stick. Huh. I won't lie though, there is a part of me that's always kind of scared looking at the totals for the treasures I have left to get. Because we're in the Sunken Ship. There are 3 levels in the game after this between Undersea Temple, Sea of Sky, and Puff Top. But those 3 levels on their own are 18 different treasures, so that's over a third of them between themselves. And that really stacks up on the, oh, that looks overwhelmingness just for those 3 levels alone. After we do the block puzzle again, we can go through this teleporter to get ourselves into another vehicle section, this time with the costume. At this point, though, let's start talking about the main staff that worked here on Starfy 1 itself, since we already talked about the fan translation staff. The main concept, who is credited as also as the director on Starfy 2 and 3, is Akio Imai, who is notably one of the main directors for Super Princess Peach. The individual listed as a coordinator is Narimitsu Nishimori, who was only credited in 2 games on Moby Games, at least. That's where I'm getting all this information from, by the way. Which are this and Dino Stalker, which I believe is a spin-off of Dino Crisis. Programmer-wise, we got 4. Hiroshi Okuda, Takahiro Furukawa, Tappei Nakano, and Satoshi Nakajima. Going through those backwards, Nakajima worked on some of the Starfy games, but also Pac-Man Party. Tappei Nakano worked on Castlevania 64, Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, Starfy 1 here, and a bunch of the Namco Museum games in the early to mid-2000s. Takahiro Furukawa, about the same stuff, but also some of the Game & Watch gallery stuff, and some of them also worked on the scattered ports of Final Fantasy to Android and mobile at the time. But what's very fun is Hiroshi Okuda, who is a pretty recent name we would have heard as well, because they were credited in the Street Fighter EX games, Fighting Layer, Starfy 1 and 2, Disgaea 4's 2 versions as an editor, but they were the main planner for network transmission, so that game came up again much sooner than I thought it would. Next up is Masao Kusakabe, who is only listed on Moby Games as working on this game as the main character designer. There's Kotaro Shinoki, who worked on basically Starfy's 1 through 3 and 5, but also did some work for Final Fantasy 2 on the PSP. Eiko Haruki worked on this and a lot of the very early WarioWare games like GBA through DS. Daisuke Nomura worked on Time Crisis Zone, this, and Crash Mind Over Mutant. Hiromine Okura worked on this, and then a lot of the later Final Fantasy 1 and 2 ports. Donna Souls on GBA, and the 2 PSP versions of both of those games. Next up on Package Edition, which I'm assuming means they were the ones who designed the literal box art in some form, we got Sachiko Nakamichi and Shiharu Sakiyama, and out of the ones we've looked at thus far, they have easily the most credits. Sachiko Nakamichi, for instance, works on a lot of stuff for artwork on Fire Emblem Heroes, Detective Pikachu, a lot of Kirby games. More or less, they're a Nintendo mainstay for art stuff and logo designs. They do a lot of work for Pokemon, for instance. They did stuff on Mother 3. Chihara Sakiyama, about the same, just for other games. Like, they did some graphic design stuff for Metroid Fusion, Prime, Zero Mission, early WarioWare games, Trace Memory, Kid Icarus Uprising. A very varied career that's still going strong to this day. Next up, we have Manual Edition, which I'm assuming means they're the people who laid out the manual. For that, we got Fujiko Nomura and Kiyomi Itani. Nomura, out of them, worked on the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeons for artwork stuff, Thracia, and I think that's Fire Emblem 4 for some artwork stuff. But they also did some stuff for Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. They did some package designing for Super Mario Land 2 and Sin and Punishment, even. Whereas Itani is about the same, but for a lot of Pokemon, but also Advanced Wars 1 and 2 I'm seeing here. Did some editing for Luigi's Mansion, Kirby's Battle Royale. Pretty varied once again, but before we do that, it's time for us to start the Boctopus boss fight, which means it's time for a cutscene that I actually read.
I've got me tentacles on a sunken treasure. Defeat me in battle and I'll hand it over. Arr.
Boctopus actually gets pretty troublesome on the refight, I find. Boctopus's changes are a little more vanilla than some of the previous bosses we've been doing. He likes to slam down a little more quickly with his tentacles, I find. But the big thing is when there's ink raining down from the sky now, he also regularly fires them at the ground level. So you're not safe to just hover down there and move left or right to dodge it. You need to stay about where I am on the screen right now in the middle third and try to dodge it from there, which can be a little more troublesome, especially considering super swimming can actually get very troublesome, or at least dangerous, doing it around there, because then you might just fling yourself into another ink ball trying to dodge the main one you were trying to get around. Ultimately, still not too bad, I guess, but be wary of your positioning in this fight and how fast you're moving. A good thing to do is actually just kind of like dance back and forth repeatedly in the same spot, so that way you can keep yourself moving, but not be flying all over the place and flinging yourself into ink balls. Honestly, our post-game revisits to the Sunken Ship is probably the last of the revisits I actually like doing, because I like Lobber's Cave, I like Coral Reef, I like this. A lot of the others either take too long to get through, especially if you're trying to get, you know, the Star Pearls up to max for the postcard, or I don't like what they add to the levels as much as I do the main playthrough as much. But this one's neat. This one gets to live. So that means we're now on to probably some of the worst levels in the game in my eyes. Before we get into the Undersea Temple, the next credit we're going to talk about in the game are the two composers listed, who are Yoko Matsutani and Morihiro Iwamoto. Matsutani is only credited in 2 games. This and Metal Gear Solid Ghost Babel on the Game Boy Color, a game I covered ages ago at this point. They are credited as both a composer and a sound effects maker. And Morihiro Iwamoto worked on these, early Bomberman Land, Dr. Mario and Puzzle League, a lot of roles for the Deadly Premonition Director's Cut, but they were also the sound designer for Mega Man X7's videos and cinematics. Another Mega Man connection. I'm happy, but it's X7. Before we get to reading out who worked on the game, let's head to the Undersea Temple and talk to Mo and see what he's got to say.
Old man Laba seems to be inside the temple. Perhaps he's looking for treasure. You should go in there and find him.
We could, but the first thing we actually want to do is head back to the sky portion by talking to Ho-Run here and go do the minigames, harder difficulties, as otherwise there's nothing else you have to do up here if you already got the magic set. The harder versions of this minigame actively do get pretty rough, particularly on the hard mode difficulty, because they start adding in extra billiards balls for you to knock around into the various holes, on top of potentially having holes that are harder to reach for the balls you're trying to hit in. Pow, that was cool. Let me tell you something neat. Recently I saw a magician flying through the air. Honest. If you have the time, you should go look for them. Here's some pearls for you. Thank you. The real problem causer I find is hole 5 on the hard difficulty, because I think for holes 3, 4, and 5 on hard, it might just be 4 and 5, we'll find out as we go here, they actively throw more balls at you, but you still have to get them all in one shot, so that requires you to bounce them all into each other in a way that is pretty specific. My best advice is to really go for bouncing off the walls to do that, like before you even hit the balls. I think for the best way to do the final shot here is to bounce off like the lower quarter, the right side of the screen, and just hope you get it. And sometimes you don't. Kinda luck-based. That was beautiful, Pow! Let me lead you to a secret place with a rare creature for your picture book. And take these as well. I mean, I'll take the pearls. The picture book is more so a begrudging, I'll do it anyway along the way at this point. Something I do admittedly find kind of funny, but also kind of mean at the same time, is by and large, every enemy that you gain access to by beating the hard mode of a minigame, you can see in the main level design either just from the main story or by going through all the treasure pathways. The only one I think it's not the case for is the weird ghost fish back in the coral reef. And now we're in this sealed block room, which is actually one of the best ways to gain star pearls in the game, because that's 3 times 6 times 5. That's just about 100 star pearls again, which, yes please. Next up, we're actually going to be going into the little puzzle areas down here, and the real rough thing is there are 2 treasures tied to the maze here, one of which is found in the exact room we found the prophecy book earlier in the LP, so you take top door, right door, down, bottom door, left door to reach that in order. But the other one, you need to get to the far right little cubby in the previous room, and then break the sealed blocks to your right to reach, and I actually offhand forget the combination to reach that off the top of my head, but we'll see in a few moments. Next up in Starfy 1's credits, we got the special thanks section, which are Masao Yamamoto, Yoshiharu Ozaki, and Gunpei Yokoi. Gunpei Yokoi is the guy who created the Game Boy, Metroid, Wario, and the Virtual Boy. And I think he also did the Wonder Swan. I think he's mostly in thanks for this because of his efforts with Nintendo to begin with. Yoshiharu Ozaki was just in the special thanks section for this. I actually don't know much about them otherwise. Whereas Masao Yamamoto did a lot of design for like Tetris Attack, Pound Upon. They were supervisors for Smash, Wii U, and 3DS. They did some support for Metal Combat, Falcon's Revenge, but they also were a programmer for Mario Land and Mario Metroid 2, so they are a very early Game Boy worker. Next up listed as an advisor, we have Takahiro Harada, who did some producer stuff for Wario Land Shake It. They did some supervising on Sin and Punishment. They were a coordinator for Zero Mission and Fusion, but they also did a lot of programming for Metroid Fusion, Mario Land 2, Metroid 2, and Super Mario Land. They're ultimately in a lot of thanks and special thanks section, though, like as early as Metroid 1, which is pretty neat in its own regard. Before we continue on with who's listening to this staff, although from here on we're getting to a little more familiar name territory, as I'll talk about probably into next part, it's time for us to go after the other treasure tied to this little maze here. And I looked through the footage just to remind myself, the order of operations you need to go through for the doors here. You need to head through the top door as you do at the start, for the actual maze path. Then you want to go through the right door, but then you want to go through the right door again. This will lead you to the far right cubby, and you can break this sealed block and go onto this treasure path. I love this little black hole enemy. They're adorable. Oh my god, Starfy, are you okay? I'm going out of my way to destroy these yellow blocks up here because a lot of these also hold 5 star pearls each. And I want to say you get about 80 up here, maybe 75. So hey, again, pretty good. Again, the later stages are honestly still pretty good for getting star pearls. We're yet to be at the best grinding location though. This isn't the worst one on the whole, though. You can do a lot worse than grinding in this level. Also, something I'm not sure I've mentioned yet, you can actually, like, press start and then select at any point to actually head back to the stage select. And I think you save your star pearl count if you do that. I just always go into a stage until I get a treasure chest at this point in the game anyway, so I don't have much of a reason to do that. That's more there in the case you didn't have the item you needed for a certain one-way path, I guess, so you don't get blocked out of progress, but oh well. Now you can fall down through this spike drop that's like Mega Man, but I want to come down here through the water for one thing to kill the enemies along the way that I think are for my picture book, but also I can just dash jump up here, take a hit, and grab this treasure chest nice and easy. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 13, we're gonna keep going over who worked on this game's staff before finishing off the Undersea Temple stage and moving on to the Sky of Sea. See you guys then. Almost 7,000 Star Pearls, we're getting there.